Welcome to the Game Dungeon. Today we're going to be earning this show's title and covering Dungeon Siege. Dungeon Siege is a fantasy action RPG. In the last episode we had some frustration, so I wanted to change gears. And in many ways this game is the polar opposite of the Secret World. We'll get into that. So once we get past the intros, we have one of the more elaborate menus I've seen. Boom! This menu makes me think there's a bunch of gnomes inside my computer cranking all these gears to make the game work. Let's get started. Now, the story to this game is, I don't know. I must have played through this game at least 6 or 7 times, and I still don't know the story. I mean, yeah, we have the narrator giving me this exposition, but it's also dry and generic. I tried to treat the story seriously the first time I played this, but nothing stuck in my memory. This game may as well not have a story. I'm serious. I'm usually not very impressed by fantasy game stories, but this goes double for Dungeon Siege. The story is there's some sort of evil force and you're gonna try and stop it. I'm pretty sure it's something along those lines. So instead, here's the story as I see it. You're a simple farmer, but then one day these orc goblin things start attacking your farm. I don't think this is the first time this has happened. So you say enough is enough, pick up a weapon, and proceed to kill everything in sight until this stops happening and you can get back to work. As far as I'm concerned, that's the entire plot of this game. You're just some farmer who's been pushed over the edge. Now, I don't expect you people of the future to be too impressed by this, but for 2002, these graphics are really nice. We have the stream, your farm, later you'll see the forest. This was a DirectX 8 game, and I feel like they were making the most with what they had to work with. While the terrain always has kind of a blocky feel, the art design is pretty good throughout the whole game. But the meat of this game is the combat. And it starts off not so great. Your character misses a lot, and it doesn't feel particularly satisfying. Now, I'm playing this guy as a melee fighter, but there are 4 disciplines in this game. Melee combat, ranged combat, nature magic, and combat magic. My advice on this is going to run contrary to everything you read on the internet about this game, but I say go with melee combat or archery. Screw magic. The magic in this game for me is just not fun. It's effective, but there's a small delay to most spells you cast, so everything just feels slowed down. You can get off multiple hits with other weapons in the time it takes you to cast one spell. Now, a few spells are quick, but as time goes on, they stop doing enough damage and you have to upgrade to the next spell, which may suck and be really slow. Also, mages are the weakest characters in the game, and all their abilities use mana. I think they're totally not worth it. Now, they are playable. In fact, they're incredibly varied. They have spells for everything you can think of. Damage, buffs, curses, summoning, manipulating the worlds, and so on. If you really want to, I'm sure you can play through the game as a mage, but I guarantee you, I'll beat the game before you do. Conventional combat is just so much faster. So we don't have a story to speak of, and the combat is kind of so-so. That's not a good sign. All I can say is, just wait. Oh, and something worth mentioning, this game is obviously inspired by Diablo, so we have the familiar red and blue potions. But there is a short delay when you heal. That's because your character literally takes out the potion and drinks it. So instead of healing just being a button that's symbolic the way it is in a lot of RPGs, here it's based on how fast can you chug. I think we can all agree this is the best healing system. I know lots of college students do. Also, you only drink what you need to heal up. So you can just drink half and save the rest for later. I like this in contrast to a lot of other games where you have to bring your character to the brink of death in order to maximize your healing efficiency. So we head deeper into the forest because it's not enough to just kill the monsters on our property. We have to push them back or they'll just keep coming. Our main enemies so far are the Krug, and they're sort of like diet orcs. They're pretty generic though. In fact, just about every enemy in this game is. We're fighting giant mosquitoes, amphibious fish, pit bulls, wolves, a bear. I'm not really sensing the great evil the story was talking about, except for the orc wannabes. It mostly looks like we're just killing all the wildlife. Whatever, I guess the farmer doesn't want to take any chances. Now, eventually we run into a crypt and get some skeletons and gargoyles, so I guess that's sort of evil, but this is super generic. Now, we have something interesting coming up, but before we get to that, I want to talk about some technical stuff. You may have noticed by now the interface to this game is kind of tiny. Well, even though I was able to mod this game to work in widescreen, the user interface uses fixed pixels. At the time of this video, 4K screens are slowly starting to emerge, so this game is not future-proof. At 1080, these menus are pretty small. I'd hate to imagine it getting even smaller. But besides that, I ran into a big problem with this game. At first, I was afraid I wasn't even going to be able to make this episode because my frame rate was so bad. I was lucky to get 20 frames a second. It was dipping down into the teens. I read some advice online on how to fix it, but none of it worked. This is another one of those weird games where a system from 10 years ago runs it better than a modern one does today. But I got lucky and figured out the issue. It's the shadows. If you enable real-time shadows on the characters, the game will start to crawl. None of the other settings matter, but if you enable blobby simple shadows, it all goes away. Thankfully, that's not that big a deal visually, so I'm happy with blob shadows if it means I can play the game. Still, this didn't happen when I played the game a few years ago. Stuff like this is why I always get paranoid about changing an OS. This sort of thing always happens with a new operating system. Sometimes there are fixes, sometimes you're screwed. It's also why I sometimes feel like punching people who think new software is always better. Doesn't matter what it breaks, it's new. Okay, back to the game. We go through the generic crypt beating up generic monsters. We get a big gargoyle as the mini-boss. Boom! That's what you get for being made out of stone. And then, aha! Another person to talk to. Who cares? Actually, the last guy I talked to wasn't that bad. He told me that the Krug loaded up a wagon and crossed a bridge while it was on fire, and whoops. So I talked to this lady and she's some sort of scribe. Whatever. But what's this? She wants to join me in my quest to kick ass? Why, yes. You may join me. Here, have some equipment I was carrying and get suited up. And just like that, we now have 2 people fighting the forces of darkness. This is definitely better, don't you think? Combat isn't quite so slow now. I'm starting to like this. So this continues on for a little while, and we start taking on bigger mobs. Very cool. We finally get to the first town, and my frame rate crawls on this cutscene, even though it immediately goes back to normal as soon as it's done. At first, I was gonna chalk this up to just another computer mystery, but I figured this one out too. Apparently, when this game has cutscenes and anti-aliasing, it's impossible to record this at more than 10 frames a second. Seriously, it's impossible. Bandicam, Fraps, DxTory, none of them work. The only way I can imagine to record this would be to stream it into a second computer and record the feed. Because once again, computers of today can't handle a 13-year-old game. Gonna need 2 computers for that one. Either that or record it through a camera, because that looks slick, right? Oh yeah, beautiful. It's still a mystery to me why this works for 99% of the game, but not on an in-game cutscene. Sometimes I think the entire industry is conspiring to make anti-aliasing not work on anything. Alright, back to the game, again. You may not realize it right away, but this first town is where the genius of this game emerges. Let's start with the obvious. You saw how happy I was with 2 people fighting. Well, this game lets you have not just 2 fighters, not just 3, 8. 8 fighters. Badass. Now, you don't get all 8 at once, but you get a lot in this first town. You can recruit one fighter, hire another one, and a nature mage? Well, not anymore, you're not. Here's your mace and shield. You can swing it like the rest of us. That's right, any character in the game you can repurpose at any time to change classes. Though realistically, it's best to catch them early on so they don't fall too far behind everybody else. It's almost like you're one big family. When your lead guy gets better equipment, he can always pass off the old stuff to the guy underneath him and so on. Everybody gets an upgrade. So if you play your cards right, you can leave town with 5 fighters ready to kick ass. But wait, there's more! You know how most Diablo clones have a lot of loot that enemies drop on the ground? In most of them, they give you too much and you can't carry it all. Well, instead of cutting back on the loot, Dungeon Siege takes it to glorious new heights by letting you buy a pack mule to carry 3 times what a normal character can. You can even buy more than one if you're really obsessive. So the next time you roll into town, it's going to be a payday to sell all the crap you've picked up along the way. This game awakens your inner kleptomaniac and brings real purpose to picking up everything that isn't nailed down. Also, this game has an automatic pickup button so you don't have to click on every last item. Your characters can do that for you. Man, I'm getting excited. This game just gets so much better after the first town. Now, a lot of this game is very generic, but there are 2 aspects about Dungeon Siege that are done so well, I feel like they propel it into Gaming Hall of Fame. The first, which you're gonna see a lot of, is the combat. Yes, the combat started off a little weak, but what can I say? Octuple your fighters, octuple your fun. This is no longer a scrappy hero and his sidekick. This is a posse. Who cares what the plot is? We're just going to roam the land delivering the hard taste of justice to all these creatures that don't deserve to live. And you can customize your party's behavior almost completely. You can control everyone individually or as a group, have them stick together or spread out, take formations, hup, 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 play defensively or attack anything that moves. And unlike most Diablo clones, you don't have to individually click on every single enemy. If you want, your fighters will take the initiative and fight anything that gets near them without you having to order them around. And that's how I like it. I'm not big into micromanagement. I love the fact that my fighters won't just stand there brain dead if they see an enemy coming. Yeah, get him! You don't need to stand around and wait for permission. In some ways, this blurs the line between an RTS and an RPG. Now, I've seen some people complain about how this takes the skill away as opposed to something more like Diablo. My response to that is, what skill? There's no skill in pressing a button over and over. The skill in Diablo clones mostly comes from understanding the combat mechanics, knowing who to target and when to retreat. And you don't lose any of that with Dungeon Siege. If anything, at harder difficulties, I think it takes more skill because you're trying to keep up to 8 people alive, not just 1. Now, is this game kind of mindless? Yes. Is this game really grindy? Yes. But it is so much fun beating the crap out of everything. This game is so addictive, it almost never feels like a grind. It's just one long road of beatdowns after another. And this brings me to the second thing that Dungeon Siege truly excels in. This game is a journey. I'll try and explain what I mean. When this game came out, one of the marketing pitches was that you never needed to load anything once you started the game. It has a dynamic streaming system built in where you can theoretically play the game from start to finish without seeing one loading screen. Now, when I first heard that, my thoughts were that sounded convenient, but loading screens aren't that big a deal. What I didn't realize is this actually changes the whole feel of the game on a subtle level. Dungeon Siege is an extremely linear game. Sometimes you have side paths or a couple forks that rejoin, but for the most part, it's just one gigantic path. You're always moving forward. Except for some tiny exceptions, you never really have a reason to backtrack in this game. I mean, you can. You can walk all the way back if you want to. It's all connected. But it's this sense of moving forward and experiencing every inch of the trail. no time transitions, no fast travel, no teleporting, that really gives the game an organic feel and adds something to it that's hard to put into words. On a more tangible level, this makes visits to towns much more meaningful. The game is paced so that by the time you reach a town, you are loaded down with loot, and every visit is a huge relief. It also means there's no saving for a rainy day. When you come to a new town, it's like the Oregon Trail. You want to spend everything you have getting all the best equipment for your party, because it could be hours out in the field before you come across another town. I frigging love this. There's no instant gratification of teleporting back to town. It forces you to commit to your decisions and it increases the tension to the game. I mean, yeah, you can always walk back to town if you want to, but do you really want to walk 20 minutes both ways? Not worth it. Especially since this game does another thing I love in RPGs. No enemy respawning. Everything you kill stays dead. If you walk backwards, this turns into a hiking simulator. Just keep moving forward. Now, the downside to all this is when you do finally make it to town, if you want to optimize your party, you're going to be spending a lot of time there. I can spend anywhere from 15 to 25 minutes just selling and buying gear and figuring out which fighter should get what. This does get a little tedious, I admit, but hey, you only have to do it every couple hours. Plus, once you have a full team with good equipment, you are officially a wrecking crew. The beatdowns never stop in this game. I love it. But this game isn't without problems. It has lots of quirks. One thing I didn't notice right away is that the foliage near your character turns transparent as you get closer so you can see what you're doing. That's fine, except they disappear altogether. Watch me walk through this tree. Ta-da! And for my next magic trick, we have water-breathing dwarves. This puddle is shallow enough that most characters can still breathe walking through it, but not dwarves. He's content to just chill there, apparently. Speaking of the dwarves, I do like how they gave them a separate running animation and didn't just scale down the default one. I'd make my whole crew dwarves if I could. Now this isn't really a problem, but something else I noticed is that in the world of Dungeon Siege, bows fire more slowly and do more damage than crossbows, which fire faster but do less damage. I honestly have to wonder if the programmers misread the design documents or something, since this is the exact opposite of reality. Also, the minigun damage is way too low. And I was praising it earlier, but the combat AI isn't perfect. There will frequently be times where some characters will just decide they don't need to join in the fight, even if you tell them to automatically. Yeah, don't worry about your buddies getting attacked, you're good. You're here as an impartial observer. That's why we brought you along. Now, probably my biggest annoyance about this game is the elevators. Occasionally you'll run into moving platforms or lifts that you'll have to put your crew on. Sometimes these are big enough to get everybody on board. Most times it's a mess. Damn it, no! This mine section is the worst. This is also one area where it really pays off to have archers instead of melee fighters. Especially with those explosive barrels lying around. No matter how tough a fighter you think you are, you get in a fight with a barrel full of gunpowder, you're going to lose. Yeah, see? On that note, I find it funny that not only can you keep playing the game if your main character dies, but you can disband them too. There's no advantage in doing so, but can you imagine other RPGs where you could just kick out the main character from the group if you didn't want them? It would be surreal. And let's not forget the title itself, Dungeon Siege. It doesn't amount to much. Even though you spend about half your time underground, you only go in a couple actual dungeons in this game. The best parts are where you're deep in the wilderness above ground anyway. They may as well have named this Action Fantasy Game 2002. The title Dungeon Siege just piles onto the generic fantasy template the rest of this game has. Ooh, a dragon head. Yeah, that's real scary, game. While there are a few small exceptions, I want to say 95% of the enemies in this game you could find in Dungeons & Dragons. The game even has a beholder in it. What more do you want? So game designers, remember, want to make a Dungeons & Dragons game but don't have money for a license? No problem. Okay, a giant skull. You got me there, game. That's original. So how's the music? Well, I have mixed feelings about the music to Dungeon Siege. On the plus side, there's a lot of it. I want to say there's over 50 different tracks for different areas in the game. It's generally okay, nothing mind-blowing, but fits the mood pretty well. Sort of. I should say the music fits the environment well. A recurring problem with the music is that it frequently plays this calm, slow-paced tune in the middle of an all-out skirmish. I'm going to mute the sound effects to some different areas. Tell me if you think this fits what you're seeing on screen. I have to wonder if they just asked the composer to make the score before he knew what this game was about? Like they just handed him some concept art of the environments and told him to hop to it? I mean, this music is pleasant, but a lot of it's not really connecting. Now, I understand they probably didn't want to do this because this is a medieval fantasy game, but let's face it, you could have constant heavy metal playing and it would fit this game just fine. Now this game also has a multiplayer component, but I have never actually played the multiplayer to this game for one simple reason. You can only control one character. What's the point of that? One single player is such a downgrade. But to complicate things, the multiplayer to this game is huge. It contains its own original map, completely separate from the campaign, and it's somewhere close to double the size of the single player game. I've never heard of something like this happening before, where the multiplayer has much more content than a game with a single player focus also. I don't mean a better experience, there's plenty of games like that, I mean more of it. That's frustrating to have this massive portion of the game locked away behind ho-hum multiplayer. I guess it has that in common with the secret world. Well, thankfully, Dungeon Siege is extremely moddable, and there's been a mod made to enable the experience for single players. It's almost like getting a sequel to the game. Overall, the experience is fantastic, and in some ways is almost better than the normal single player. That said, the multiplayer map is much less linear, which makes it better and worse. Choosing where you want to go is a lot of fun, but sometimes the wide, massive areas feel like you're mowing a lawn to try and see everything in the level. It doesn't help that your movement speed is kind of slow. Oddly enough, Dungeon Siege is a game that I think does better when you're on more narrow paths. The multiplayer also has teleporters because the size is so massive, which I'm not crazy about, but they're used very sparingly, so it's not too big a deal. It is a big deal getting everybody on the actual teleporter though. Look how tiny this thing is. I guess I shouldn't complain since I'm playing with a full party in a map that's meant for one person, but this is easily the worst part of the game right here. Damn it! Oh, come on! Anyway, the multiplayer is mostly a giant remix of all the stuff in the single player campaign, but it really feels like its own world also. It also has a new area that's not in the single player at all. A massive desert full of mysteries. Not that it's any better, but the multiplayer actually has a story too, where you're recovering these artifacts to unlock this ancient chamber which contains some unique enemies also not in the single player. Now I wanted to show this to you, but I had to make a judgment call if it was really worth the extra 15 hours on a game I've already played to show you one or two clips. So you'll just have to find that out on your own if you're interested. Same goes for the secret chicken level. And while it's probably the best, this is just one mod of many. I'm gonna have to try some more out myself later on. I know one group remade Ultima 5 and 6 entirely in Dungeon Siege. There's such a wealth of content out there for this game, though due to its age, it's starting to get harder to find. All in all, Dungeon Siege is a fantastic experience if you like exploring the road ahead, great combat, and not much else.
May the road you follow be pleasant, and your vengeance complete.
Exactly. But to be completely fair, while I didn't think much of the story, there was one character I remembered from playing this game multiple times. Ladies and gentlemen, say hello to Jiraiya. He runs a trading post out in the middle of the woods.
Who are you, then? Another of that short goblin cuss's errand runners? You tell that little green snotball I don't have any high and mighty magic staff, and I never did. I don't traffic in exotics, and even if I did have one, I'm not gonna go trudging through the eastern swamp looking to sell it to some damn foreigner. Now, if there's anything else I can get you today, maybe I'll consider not tossing your ugly butt out into the snow!
Also, I'd like to point out that he has a human head on his shelf. So that's Dungeon Siege. Now, I would end this here, but hey, this game turned into a franchise, so I want to cover the rest of it too. So let's get this all out in one episode. Prepare to be Dungeon Sieged. Next up is the expansion, Legends of Arana. It has you fighting in a new continent, and it's mostly just more of the same, though they do add a new jungle environment. It also adds some nice features like automatically calculating a weapon's DPS, auto-allocating potions, backpacks, dinosaur pets, and it has a climactic ending and an obsession with clock gears. It's a solid addition to the game. And this is nothing you haven't heard before, but I wanted to point out that this is an expansion, not DLC. It mostly reuses the same assets, has a few small additions, but it takes about 15 to 20 hours to play through this. For the few of you out there who don't understand why a lot of gamers don't like DLC, this is a huge part of it. This is what a lot of older gamers expect from a new release. Legends of Arana was a typical expansion for the time. Not an amazing one, but so many DLCs are for $10 or $15 and all they do is add a couple hours to gameplay. Would you rather pay $15 for 2 hours of gameplay or pay $40 for a full and complete game? The people who complain about DLC do it not because they like to complain about every little thing, but because they've already seen how much better gaming can be and think other gamers are tools for accepting less. Okay, moving on, let's get to the big one. Dungeon Siege 2. I actually don't have as much to say about this one compared to the original. It added a lot of new things, but it lost some important stuff along the way. The combat is much more bombastic, with special effects flying all over the place. I admit, I'm fond of this one. Boom! The game also tried a lot harder to flesh out a story, and while I think the voice acting is all pretty good, I can't help but wonder if it was a wasted effort. Hey fantasy fans, stop me if you've heard this one before. The plot to Dungeon Siege 2 is that there's this ruthless warlord who's aligned himself with an evil sorcerer, and he's pillaging the land in search of a powerful artifact, which will give him ultimate power and destroy the land. Oh, you have heard that one. In about 100 other fantasy stories? Yeah, me too. Oh, and remember how Dungeon Siege 1 had lots of token fantasy creatures? Well, one thing it didn't have was elves. Well, Dungeon Siege 2 solved that problem. You start off fighting alongside an elf, then later go to an elf village, then see dark elves, dryad tree elves, elves. Christ. Now, I think the best change of 2 over 1 has to be the magic system. Magic is a totally viable option in Dungeon Siege 2, and it all flows a lot faster. So what's bad? Well, the first thing is they reduced your fighter cap from 8 to 4 for your first time through, but if you play the game over and over, you can bump it up to 6. Still, I think that's kind of weak as I want more fighters, not less. More! And they decided to add respawning enemies, which I am not a fan of. As always, I like my enemies to stay dead. They don't do that here. Oh, and the AI got dumbed down, so your units can no longer take initiative. Yeah, that's right, just stand there. Perfect. Finally, they added frequent teleporter checkpoints, like in Diablo 2, so you can warp back to town constantly. While I think the teleporting animation looks pretty sweet, this destroys that sense of a journey the original had. I liked having to make decisions out in the field rather than constantly run back home to town. So that's a big loss. I think this is an example where making the game too convenient for players actually makes it worse. All in all, I think 2 is a good game and had a lot of objective improvements, but it doesn't feel as unique the way the first one did, and it took away some of the original strengths. Although I will say 2 has one of the best game trailers I've seen. They absolutely nailed the music and direction for this. This trailer is better than the game itself. So not long afterwards, 2 got its own expansion, Broken World. They cut back on the budget for this one since they got new voice actors for all the characters, but overall, I think it's pretty good. Like Legends of Arana, it's mostly just more of the same. I actually found myself a little more interested in the story to this one, since the idea is you beat the bad guy in the last game, but he kind of wrecked the planet in the process, so everyone blames you. You are not popular at all in this game.
It's because of you that my poor Arlen no longer has a mother. Get out of my sight!
Okay. Also, it has more dwarves than the other games combined, so it gets bonus points for that. After that, there was a PlayStation Portable game, Throne of Agony. I never played this one, but it was just a mobile game and you only control one character, so I probably didn't miss too much. I think it has the coolest looking cover out of any of the games though. Next, we of course had the Dungeon Siege movie by everyone's favorite director, Uwe Boll. I have not seen this since every review I've read on it says it's terrible, and I have no reason to doubt them. The fact that they gave the Dungeon Siege movie a story was their first mistake. The story to Dungeon Siege has no value at all. I'm not even sure how you would make a movie based on the game. I think it would have to be an experimental film where you cover a group of fighters on a trail for an hour and a half, watching them beat up everything. That's what the game was. And finally, we have Dungeon Siege 3. My. I read an article before about how games that release demos tend to have worse sales than if they don't release one at all. And I feel like Dungeon Siege 3 is a textbook example of why that is. I've only played the demo, and wow, this series took a turn. I don't know the full story, but at some point Obsidian acquired the rights to Dungeon Siege and decided to put their own spin on it. Remember how I complained that Dungeon Siege 2 lowered the party count to 4 to 6 fighters? Well, Obsidian decided to continue that trend and lowered the party to 1.5, depending on how you want to count it. A helper character and 1 fighter you control. The entire strength of the Dungeon Siege series is having your own squad, and they got rid of that. Hey, how about we make a sequel to Wolfenstein with no Nazis in it, and a sequel to StarCraft with no aliens while we're at it? The controls and camera are a mess compared to the previous games. The art design is gorgeous, but this isn't Dungeon Siege. This game is a hack and slash, but that's literally the only thing it has in common with it. Except for the lore, but the Dungeon Siege lore is worthless anyway. I'm not sure what to say here. Maybe this game is okay, or rather, this game might be okay if it wasn't named Dungeon Siege 3. So as a Dungeon Siege sequel, I give this a failing grade. So yeah, we're done here. This is the Dungeon Siege episode, and whatever this is, it's no longer Dungeon Siege. We got a little lost here.
You're about as welcome here as a badger in a stone-cold outhouse, you know that?
Okay, awards time. First award, Best Beatdowns. You wouldn't think this would be enough to carry a game, but wow, for me it sure was. Winding Road. This game is a medieval road trip, and I love it for that. I'd like to see more games adopt this style of one continuous journey. And finally, all-time favorite. This game really clicks with me. It does some things really well I just haven't seen since. That's the thing I don't understand. There must be 100 clones inspired by Diablo, but to date, I don't know of a single game with gameplay like Dungeon Siege. This is squad-based Diablo. This is a fantastic idea that's begging to be copied by another game, but I just haven't seen anything like it. Maybe there's a game like this that's come out that I just don't know about. But I've been looking. What Diablo clones can I have 8 characters on screen all fighting for me at the same time? Now some people might point out that some Diablo clones let you have summonable creatures to help you fight. But I don't think you want to play that card. Because if you want to play as a summoning mage, Dungeon Siege lets you have up to 16 characters fighting for you. I don't get it. It seems like every game that lets you have a big party is either turn-based combat or else careful tactical combat. I don't want that. I want my crew to just run in there and smash some heads. Nobody wants to be the next Dungeon Siege. Why not? At the start, I said this is sort of the opposite of the Secret World. That's because it has great combat, a weak story, and is a single-player game, but lets you control multiple characters. I'm not really into MMOs, and this is a big part of it. Every time I see a game with slow combat, I always think, gee, this would be so much better if I could control 4 or 5 more people, like Dungeon Siege. This game has ruined most MMOs for me, and a lot of other RPGs. It's not for everyone, but man, for others, if you can play a game where your crew just beats things senseless, non-stop for hours, it does things to your brain. You start to think things are alright. Everything's gonna be okay. We could just beat up everything. All our problems are solved. Okay, that's it. Stay tuned for the next episode for the most hardcore Christmas game I've played. And cookies. Hammer of Stabbing. Why, yes, I believe I will take one of those.